What's up, guys? So today we finally have another deck profile coming to the channel. I have recently been playing Gecko Moria a lot this set. I've been having a ton of fun with it, also a ton of success with it. It's definitely a different deck that I don't think people were expecting to be as strong in this meta as it is, but when we go through some of the tools that the deck has currently and what it's maintained, it makes a lot of sense why it's been seeing some recent success, also why it hasn't fallen out of the meta or out of competitive play. And I think people were really expecting this meta to shift away from this and totally be on Lucci, which Lucci is a great deck. I would say the decks are similar somewhat, but the playstyles are vastly different. I think I've competed in about 2 or 3 locals with this list alone, and currently I've yet to lose a locals this entire set across Bonnie and across Gecko. So this is technically a 9 or 10-0 list, and the cohesiveness is just very much there. So we'll go through a bit of a breakdown of every single thing, but make sure to stay tuned to the end, one, so we can go over some key combos that the deck will be able to play, and also some substitutions that you can make that I've tested around with as well, but I've landed on this in terms of feeling the most cohesive. So what we'll start off with, obviously we have our leader. So Gecko Moria, 1 Dawn attached, 2 Dawn on tap. So when you attack, tap 2, discard 1 card, mill the top 2 cards, and then play a 4 cost or less Thriller Bark from your trash into play. Your main play for this, at least in the beginning stages of the game, is ideally always Perona. Perona will make your opponent discard 1, so for decks that you usually stall against, you kind of even out that stall. You lower their life count, make them ditch 1, so they're not actually increasing their hand size. So what usually you would do to deny resources, technically you are still doing, but you are also getting a swing in. So very good leader skill, semi-Dofi leader skill. So our goal for this deck is really to flood board more so over KOing things. That was the 06 sort of package because you had Great Eruption. We no longer have Great Eruption, so our goal really is to flood board and then KO things as they come along. So getting into it, we will start with our searchers for the deck. I'm just on 3 brand new Navy Searcher, top 3, choose a Navy, mill the other 2. This card is really nice as a turn 1 play if you go second. Just kind of get some cards in the trash. That's really the main focus of it. There is a good chance you whiff with this card, but the main focus is really building up the trash, getting your Thriller Bark cards in there, getting your big A-drop Moria in there so you can fetch it back out. That's really the main goal of brand new. And if you hit a 2K off of it, then great. That's just bonus. So if you go second, you play this on 2 Dawn, great. If you go first, your Dawn 5 play is usually going to be leader skill plus a brand new if you have the brand new in hand. Build technically 2 bodies, get some card cycle going. It's pretty good position to be in. So next up, we'll go through the entirety of the Thriller Bark package. This is the main bread and butter of the deck. This is what you're going to be comboing with for the most part and building plays off of that. So we got 4 Perona, we got 4 Hogback, and we have 4 Absalom. So Perona skill is always dependent on your opponent having 5 cards in hand. You can't do either of the skills unless they have 5 cards in hand. So it's either ditch 1 or -3. 90% of the time, you're pretty much always going to force them to ditch 1, because if you're playing Perona, that's usually the reason. Discard 1. Hogback is sort of your filter, as well as sort of your get back to hand. So bot deck 2 cards, grab a Thriller Bark of any cost, just Thriller Bark type, add it to hand. So this is really your main way of getting Moria back into hand, so you can either loot Morias, or if you don't have one in hand, let's get that in hand. Or late game, if you need defense, we're going to grab a 2K from that option, so that way we can bolster our hand a bit. Absalom here is the KO, the main KO of the deck. There are 2 main KOs of the deck. This is one of them. So bot deck 2, KO with 2 costs or less. So this is really good for, Moria combo plays, lower something, KO with 2 costs or less. You're getting rid of an opponent's unit. You're building some board presence as well. So pretty straightforward. Obviously not as good as Lucci because that KOs 2 things, but the reason this is still so important in the deck is because we don't have as much minus across the board. So Lucci isn't as valuable in this deck because you don't have as much easy minus. This deck is more so focused on, like I said, flooding board, getting those single target pops, so you're maintaining tempo, but you're also reducing your opponent's ability to attack you. So this, I wouldn't really stray away from, the 4-4-4 split. I think it's completely necessary because if you don't see this on curve on your 3 Dawn turn, it just feels really bad. You need to keep up the tempo, even if you're just developing a body, whether it's Perona. Ideally, it is Perona, but even if it is one of these 2, ideally, we're just getting a body on board for 3 Dawn. So that is the main focus there. Next up, we have the rest of the 2Ks in the deck. Obviously, nothing crazy here. It's just 3 Suru, 4 Sindri. Previously was on 4 Suru, 4 Sindri, but the reason that I dropped down to 3 Suru is so we could up the count of some other cards in the deck. Obviously, Suru is a great card, 1, because it's -2 cost, which is great, 1 for 2, very cheap. Gets searchable off brand new, great, playable off Moria to KO in that kind of scenario, usually a 4 cost with Absalom. So great card, but we did reduce it by 1 to make space for some other cards. Sindri is a great card for this deck specifically because for 1 Dawn, mill top 5 of your cards. So if you see this on your first turn, you play this, start building your trash, start seeing what options you can get to. If you have a bad opening hand but you see this, you have a good chance of milling into either of these 12 cards. That way you can start using leader skill the following turn. So very simple, very straightforward. Just our extra 2Ks in the deck, we're running 11, which provides some good defense for the deck. So we got 11, and we got some additional skills that we can build off of those. So next up, this starts becoming a lot more of the minusers for the deck. So we have 3 Hina, 2 Helmeppo, and we got 4 Ice Age. So the reason behind this split is Hina obviously great to combo off of Rebecca. So we are running Rebecca in the deck. Great combo, -4. You can even hard play it to get down, you know, in the RP Law matchup, get down, you know, those kids, those queens, stuff like that. Pop them with Absalom with the follow up. So just really strong minus, also searchable off brand new. So ideally we get it in the trash. Helmeppo is really there for that Moria combo. I was on 1 previously, but up to 2 because it just felt like we really needed to see it to maintain tempo. So, you know, we can play Helmeppo into Absalom, KO of 5 cost, KO of 4 cost, and then the follow-up reason we run for Ice Age is so that we can KO those bigger bodies on those Moria turns. Because this together, KO's an 8 cost. There's an additional card that lets us get up higher than that. So it's very good. It's very nice. You know, it pretty much, it feels like every sort of target range that we need to hit to KO something, we'll be able to have it with this split. Now, at the end of the video, I'll also go over some substitutions like I mentioned on what you could add, but for right now, this split feels very consistent, feels very good. We see it when we need to. You know, we can even pick up Helmeppo off the brand new. Ideally, we just mill it into the trash because that's where we want it to be in the first place. So next up, we have a bit of our mid-range package, if you want to call it that, just based off the scenarios that we played in, and it's also where the deck becomes a little bit different. So we have 3 Sabo and 3 Sakazuki. I think everybody at this point knows Sabo's importance, especially if you're playing a black deck against another black deck. That way you can sort of protect your board for the entirety of the turn, really reduces the threat of a Moria that your opponent is going to be playing. So if you're going first with this deck and you're playing against black, ideally your curve is 1 Sindri, 3 leader skill, 5 Dawn turn, play a Sabo, protect what you just developed, and your opponent is kind of stumped for what to do for their 6 Dawn turn. That is kind of the ideal. You also get great card cycle with Sabo, and late game, he's a great blocker. Just kind of wall up a little bit, protect your board, can't pop anything, and you have really good presence. Now, Sakazuki is not my original idea. A lot of the topping Gecko lists, or a couple of the topping Gecko lists have started to include it, and it makes a lot of sense why. If you go second and you're on 6 Dawn, you're popping anything your opponent played previously. This is great into the Bonnie matchup, great into the Enel matchup, because you're popping sort of a tempo unit that they would have. That can be a Cavendish, that can be a Bonnie, that can be a Gadatsu, a Rocket Luffy if they decide to play that out. So you're clearing anything and just immediately. And it's a 6/7. So 1, it's harder for black to remove, and 2, it's 7, so it's harder for red purple law to remove. They would require 2 cards to get this off the board. So it's great tempo. It also lets you set up your trash for any plays that you're going to be making on your follow-up 8 Dawn turn. You put Helmeppo in there, you can put, you know, Rebecca in there, anything like that. So you're getting rid of an opponent's unit, you're building tempo, you're setting up your trash. It's got great versatility, plus it's also searchable off brand new. Great card. So next up, we'll be going a bit into the combo sort of plays. So we'll talk about this a little bit. So we got a 3-3 split of Rebecca and Brook. Now, the reason behind Rebecca, well, there's not really too much to go. It's a great card. Got a lot of it's a blocker, develop another unit, usually a Hina or a Brook, so you got good tempo. The reason behind the 3 Brook is because it allows us to develop even wider with a Moria play. We go Moria for 8 Dawn, we get a Rebecca. Let's assume we're on a 9 or a 10 Dawn turn. We play Moria for 8, we get Rebecca, we get Helmeppo. Off Rebecca, we get the Brook, so that's, you know, and assuming we already played the Ice Age. So if your opponent has a 9 costed unit, Ice Age onto that, drops down to 4 cost. Helmeppo brings it down to 3, so it's at 1. We got the Rebecca. We play the Brook off of the Rebecca. That brings that unit down to 0. So we've developed 4 units, and we KO'd an opponent's huge body. So it could be a 9-drop Zoro, could be a 9-drop Yamato, could even be, you know, our opponent's own Gecko or something like that. So we're getting so much value, and Brook is a card that your opponent doesn't want it to stay on the board, because it's a free -1. It could also be a good pop, assuming, you know, we have the cards to minus before the attack. So Brook has just got a lot of value. Your opponent's almost always going to clear it, so it's almost like a pseudo blocker as well. You just get so much value. It's a good attacker if it needs to be. So, you know, we're really able to put on a lot of pressure and maintain a lot of resources. You get a lot of units. You're clearing with a you know, the Brook. You got the blocker going. It's just a lot of pressure, a good tempo play, as well as it's just a fun combo play in general. So, and we'll start to move a little bit out of the way for this, so that way we can make some more space. And next up, we'll kind of be going into the top end of the deck. So the top end for this deck is 4 Moria, 2 Isho, and 1 Stussy. I don't really know how to pronounce it. I'm not that far into One Piece yet. But yeah, so the reason for this spread at the top end, 4 Moria should be obvious. You know, it's our main combo play of the deck. It develops a big body, develops a bunch of other smaller bodies, and we're clearing units off of it. So ton of Dawn plussing, ton of resource plussing, so great card, obvious for the deck. And because we are running the Thriller Bark package, because we're a Thriller Bark deck, the recursion for Moria is just that much more prevalent. Now, 8-drop Isho, also not my own original idea. A lot of black decks in general have been running this card because we're in a very 5-life heavy meta with leaders, as well as big body meta. So the importance behind Isho is there are a lot of times your opponent is going to have that 6 or more hand size very often. And because we're a 5 life leader, we're naturally more bulky. So we can, most of the time that our opponent has 6 or more cards, play this safely on like a 3 life. 8 Dawn or 9 Dawn will probably be around that 2 to 3 life range. We play this, we're setting up for future turns, but we're also ripping resources from our opponent. And all of those high costed units that might normally be safe are just going to be so much more easily poppable. You can play this one turn, and then on follow-up turns, you can even have Sakazuki, for example, KO big-bodied units for very cheap. That's why Ice Age is even that much more better in this list, is because, you know, on a 10-costed unit, one Ice Age plus Sakazuki, we're popping it for free, basically. So Isho is great, you know, minus across the board, card ripping, and great stat line, 8-9, essentially an 8-10, because most of the time he's always going to have that one Dawn. And lastly, for the last card in the deck, is a 1 of Stussy. So this card on play, we can trash one of our own units to KO anything on our opponent's board. The reason behind this being a 1 of is because there are often times that we'll be playing against Lucci, we'll be playing against Bonnie or Enel. It takes a lot of resources to be able to KO those top end units, but this lets us do it for more or less free. There's going to be a large percentage of the time that we have a brand new, we have a Sindri, we have a Sura on board that may or may not be dead cards. So for just removing those off our board, getting them in the trash where we want them to be, we're KOing a big bodied unit that our opponent might not be expecting. You know, there was just a match, you know, just last week where my opponent, they played out their Moria. I didn't have too many resources in hand. They thought they were really safe because, you know, how I don't have so many cards to combo with. Like, how am I going to get it down? We have the Stussy just for those moments. We, you know, KO their Moria. We're able to, you know, really apply the pressure on the next turn. They don't have the resources to bring down the 9-costed unit because, you know, we've been in that game for a minute. So it's just got a lot of, it's a 1 of for a reason because we only need to see it for very specific moments. Most of the time, our comboing for KO is going to be Sakazuki, you know, Moria, Brook, Absalom, stuff like that. So this list has felt extremely consistent, which is very nice. Very rarely do you truly brick with this deck because it just filters so much. There's so much recursion built into the deck. Most of the time that Lucci struggles is because they mill too many Morias. They don't have a way to get it back into hand. We have an innate way to get it back into our hand because we run Hogback because it's part of the package. So this deck is completely fine with going first or second. Obviously, depending on the matchup, I think is what you should dictate going first or second. It's got a curve for either. You know, if you go second, brand new into usually just a leader skill play, get the Perona out, and, you know, 7/7 swing, leader skill. 6 Dawn, we can either do leader skill again, we can go Sabo, we can go Sakazuki. You know, we can technically go wide with Hina Brook if we really want to. KO a 5 cost, which could be great against Law. And then 8 Dawn turn, you know, we got an array of options. We could go Saka, we could go Rebecca combo, we could go Moria combo, we could go Isho. So you got a great curve going first or second. Going first, you know, we got the Sindri into leader skill, into Sabo. 7 Dawn turn, we use leader skill, develop a 4 cost from our hand, so we're building 2 bodies in 1 turn. The way you really should be playing this deck currently is not so much focused on the KO. Yeah, it's a great part of the deck, but we're also able to get very wide on our opponents and force them to swing into our bodies while we're managing their resources more than they're managing ours. So I think the way to play this deck right now, which I've been feeling a lot of success with, is really focusing on getting wide, playing more of a blue Dofi kind of style with this leader, and then using the removal when you need to. And it's felt very consistent. There's a lot of tools in the deck. We naturally have a bit more resources because we have built-in recursion being a black deck. As for matchups with this deck, I find the Lucci matchup is really close to 50-50. It kind of depends on who is able to see their removal more timely. Obviously, they're a bit more built for removal, so if they have a lot of removal but we can get wide, that's kind of the matchup. Can they remove as fast as we can get wide? And if they can, it's going to be a little tough for us, but the opposite, if we can get wide enough before they can start removing, we'll be in the advantage. So it's a bit of a 50-50 matchup. Bonnie, I've had a lot of success against Bonnie. I don't know how other people feel about it, but with this in particular, I feel like it's, you know, 55-45 or 60-40 in our favor because we are able to get really wide on them. We do have the Isho to be able to rip later on. It's felt really good for me, so I would say it's 60-40. I think the toughest matchups for this meta will most likely be Law and Enel, which is a little weird because prior, you know, I think we were favored in those. But the reason I say those is because Enel obviously has Ace now, so their ability to stall is a lot higher. Isho is extremely important in Enel. If you don't see Isho, I think you're going to struggle a fair amount, just because they're able to outstall your ability to get wide and just kind of, they're naturally more defensive. They're able to play more defensive. They got the Yamato clear, they got Gadatu clear, they got Luffy clear, which is great against our decks. We run a lot of 4 costs. And then Red Purple Law sometimes could go too fast for you. It is possible if they are, if Red Purple Law sees it. I mean, against any deck, if Red Purple Law sees it, they usually have it. But because they just cheat out so many bodies so quickly, and, you know, they're poking you left and right, if you don't see timely removal against them, especially against their kid, it could feel a little rough. So I would say those matchups are kind of more 60-40 their favor, maybe 55-45 their favor, but definitely still winnable. And then in terms of sort of off-meta matchups, you know, Blue Dofi, I think it's pretty even split, but I would slightly favor us a little bit, just depending on, assuming we can, you know, wait out those resources. I would say we're pretty favored. Bonnie, you know, we're favored, stuff like that. Black Yellow Luffy, actually, so that's an interesting one. Theoretically they should be extremely favored, but I don't actually think it's too bad for a couple of reasons. One is because we can develop Sakazuki and Isho. Those are very good bodies that we can play, Isho's ripping resources from them. Saka is removing their board, but the main purpose of Saka in that matchup is it's just a 6-7. They don't have a way to remove it. It's staying on the board for the most part, and it allows us to swing. So for that matchup, what I find is I just go as wide as I want pretty easily. If they want to eat their life quickly, yeah, that's fine. Then we just swing big because we're naturally bulkier, and we do have resources to build and recur. Like we can go Gecko, build Rebecca, stuff like that. It hasn't really been too much of an issue for me. Not that it can't be, but if we're able to play the Ishos, get wide with big bodies, or get wide with bodies in general quickly, where they're not expecting us to blitz them out the game when they're at 2 life, then it is very possible. So I feel like theoretically that should be like a 60-40 in their favor, but for me it's kind of been the reverse a little bit. Not going to say that's always going to happen, but it's not a completely unwinnable matchup by any means. So that is a bit of a breakdown in terms of, you know, some combos you can do, some matchups in the meta, you know, where I think it's at. Now, what we can get into a little bit is some tech options or different choices. I have played a couple iterations of this deck. I've been trying to figure out what I like the most. And in terms of additional cards that you can think of, there is a handful. Lucci, Kuzan, Borsalino, another Isho, as well as Tempest Kick. So we'll start off with the easiest one to start with, Isho. So the reason behind another Isho being in here is because 3 Isho is usually pretty comfortable, so you see consistently. I opted for 2 Isho, 1 Stussy for the reasons that I mentioned for Stussy. It's a good just KO anything card, and I feel like we'll see Isho if we need to. It's not super necessarily in all matchups, but in the Enel and Bonnie matchup especially, we do need to see it, so usually we can. So that's the reason behind that. Lucci. The reason we don't run Lucci is because we don't have as much widespread minus, so usually it doesn't feel too great. You could still run it because we are obviously running the Ice Age, but just know that if you do, you know, you can only really KO a 7 cost if you're using just this and then putting this on a 4 cost unit. So you can KO a 7 and a 4, or you can KO 1 10 cost. But if you're KOing 1 10 cost, it's the same thing as just playing an Absalom. So that's why I'm not running Lucci, because we don't have that usual moments where we would be able to KO 2 units. You know, we don't have stage that minuses or anything like that. So it's not super necessary. Kuzan and Borsalino, I did run them and it was very successful, but most of the time you don't really need the minus off of the Kuzan. And most of the time we do have enough defense without the Borsalino. A great 7-down play would be leader skill, play one of these 2. You get really good tempo that way, but it just hasn't felt super necessary to have them in the deck. But if you do want to run them, you definitely can. It doesn't feel bad. It just sometimes doesn't feel super necessary. And Tempest Kick, theoretically Tempest Kick would be really good, but in this deck it doesn't feel as good because it feels like the build up for 10 cards in trash just isn't as quick as Lucci. Obviously, you know, both decks mill 2 cards. Technically, Gecko mills. Well, yeah, it's mill 2 cards because you recur 1 from the trash off the rest of that skill. So it just hasn't felt super great. I'd rather just stack up on the Ice Age and get that big minus. And it's also not that great for us because we do only do that single pop. There's no real double popping like off the Lucci. That's why this is great in Lucci, is because, you know, it fits the purpose of Great Eruption. You're able to minus a wide spread of things, make use of Lucci or Sabo. But we don't run those, so the Tempest Kick isn't as great because we don't have that widespread minus. But overall, it's a good card. You could think about running it, but I think you would sort of have to change up the rest of the build, maybe add some more. You would probably have to add Kuzan and Lucci, so you kind of have that spread of minus and spread of KO to be cohesive. But other than that, this has felt like a fantastic deck to me. I think it's got a really good spot in the meta. In terms of like a top 5 where it would fall, I don't actually know if I would put it into the top 5, but it definitely feels like it's like number 6, at least to me. I've been able to beat every single meta deck with this deck, and it feels really good. Because one, I think people forget how to play against it, but it also has a slightly different playstyle than it did in 06. So I think it's very strong right now. I think it's a great option to play if you don't quite like Lucci. This feels more consistent and more of my playstyle in terms of getting wide and sort of doing combos like that. Lucci is obviously great, but you are really dependent on that mill and not milling your geckos, so it's a little bit scarier. So I think if you want to play a black deck, but Lucci doesn't quite feel like it for you, this could be a great alternative. And, you know, we kind of went over the matchups already, so if you kind of want more of an in-depth breakdown or maybe some combo breakdown or even some gameplay of this list, definitely let me know in the comments. I used to play this deck a little bit in 06, and my friends, there was one game I lost that was really bad, and so I think they would appreciate making a how to actually play the deck video rather than a how to not play the deck video. So if you guys want that, some gameplay, definitely let me know. We can get it out there and sort of show how to pilot it against, you know, pretty much any deck, or just some combos, breakdowns, stuff like that. So I appreciate you guys watching the video. I think this is probably gonna be a bit of a longer one, but I really wanted to get that information out there. You know, I've seen a lot of success with this deck across like 2, 3 locals, you know, undefeated technically speaking. So it's felt really good, and I would advise you guys to pick it up if you want to try something different for this set. But yeah, other than that, you know, definitely stay tuned for some other videos. I'll be making a Bonnie list soon. I've done extremely well with that deck this set as well, technically even better than this one. So stay tuned for that. And, you know, other than that, just let me know what you guys want to see in the comments, and we'll go from there. But yeah, take care, guys. Have a great one. Peace.